Hello, I'm Esther Githu-Ewart. It's Monday, July 24th. This is Africa 54. Search and rescue operations for survivors are ongoing in Cameroon following a building collapse that has killed at least 33 people. Insurgent groups are driving the violence in Mozambique's northern region. More than 800,000 have been displaced since 2017. And record-breaking heat worldwide is expected to continue as many scientists link the extreme weather to climate change. All this and much more coming up on today's Africa 54. We begin our broadcast with tragic news from Cameroon, where search and rescue operations for survivors is ongoing Monday after a building collapsed, killing at least 33 people, according to Celestine Kecha Courts, the country's housing and urban development minister. The severely dilapidated four-story building in the city of Douala collapsed onto a smaller one Sunday in the Dobon neighborhood. More than 200 people occupied both impacted buildings. Douala's city council is currently demolishing houses in high-risk zones susceptible to floods or landslides. However, the building that collapsed on Sunday was not marked for demolition. Extremist insurgent groups are driving the violence in Mozambique's northern region, displacing more than 800,000 people since 2017, according to the United Nations. Humanitarian groups say assistance from Rwandan and Southern African troops is helping to decrease attacks. Sergio Nambi spoke to humanitarian organizations working in the region and some of those displaced by violence in their story, narrated by Joao Jose Santarita.
Hasman Halfa was forced to move from the Kisanga district in Cabo Delgado province located in northern Mozambique due to violence. He says his only wish is stability in the region.
There's a common song among all displaced people, peace. We want peace and tranquility and recover the few things we had.
Alpha is one of 800,000 people internally displaced in Mozambique, according to the United Nations. Alpha says after his village was attacked, he still doesn't know where his father is.
The most difficult moment was the time when the terrorists attacked my village, Kisanga. I had to separate from my father to survive. We spent 4 days without seeing each other. No one knew the whereabouts of the others.
Authorities say that violence has declined in recent months, with support from foreign forces, mainly Rwandan and Southern African troops. That, says Mariana Camarotti, is allowing some people to return home.
Since the second half of last year, we have observed that thousands of people have started to return to their home villages in Musimbo da Praia, Moeda. These people, who were living in IDP camps or hosted by families, faced many challenges in accessing basic services such as health, education, food, clean water, and livelihood. Today displaced, they continue to face the same challenges.
Several organizations have started projects to assist displaced people. One such organization is Azul, a consultancy group focusing on social change in Cabo Delgado. Azul's association coordinator says they still face challenges in the field, helping people to adjust.
The biggest challenge is the lack of resources, especially in the area of social cohesion.
Red Cross Camarotti agrees that there is a need to constantly keep monitoring the volatile situation displaced people find themselves in to provide assistance.
Another challenge is that we have to constantly adapt to this changing context and also adapt to the dynamics of the conflict in order to be able to bring the necessary assistance to the most vulnerable people. Humanitarian aid is very much needed to provide emergency assistance. to these people and help them start their lives again in the regions of origin, but also long-term assistance so they can establish themselves and have their own livelihood.
Despite various efforts to help those in need, insurgent attacks have not completely stopped and people's lives still remain in limbo. For Sérgio Nyambi, João Santa Rita, VOA News.
A suicide bomber in Somalia has killed at least 13 soldiers and wounded at least 20 more inside a military academy in Mogadishu on Monday, according to a soldier who saw the bodies. The militant group Al-Shabaab is claiming responsibility for the attack. A military campaign launched by government forces and allied militiamen last year has forced the Al-Qaeda-linked group from large areas in southern Somalia, but the militants have continued to stage deadly raids. In recent weeks, Al-Shabaab fighters have stepped up their attacks. July 24th marks 100 days of conflict between Sudan's warring factions, with reports of fresh clashes flaring up on Monday. Mediation attempts from international and regional powers have failed to find a political solution to end the fighting. Fighting erupted on April 15th as the government, army and paramilitary rapid support forces battled to control the country. The conflict has uprooted more than 3 million people, including more than 700,000 who have fled to neighboring countries like Egypt, Chad and South Sudan. The RSF moved into villages in Gezira state directly south of Khartoum over the weekend. Witnesses say the Sudanese army conducted airstrikes against the RSF. Now, for more on Sudan's humanitarian crisis, I'm joined live via Skype from here in Washington by Abdullahi Halake. He is Refugees International Senior Advocate for East, Horn and Southern Africa. Abdullahi, welcome to Africa 54.
Pleasure, Esther. Thank you.
We hear many desperate Sudanese nationals are fleeing to neighboring countries. What are the findings of Refugees International?
The situation is really dire because leaving Khartoum, where most of them are going to Egypt, is very difficult because the road between Khartoum and where they come to Egypt is laden with many challenges, including people not being able to get buses, the bus fare being hiked because they are trying to make as much profit. But even more importantly, the conflict that is going on is making it very difficult for people to leave Khartoum safely.
So now who is responsible for reuniting these families that are being split because they lack documentation?
Thank you so much. That's a very important question that you brought up, Esther, regarding the family separation. Egypt and Sudan have got an agreement that they term the Four Freedoms. As part of that agreement, everybody from Sudan except men under the age of 17 and under the age of 50 are allowed to come in. As a result, what you have is a lot of single-led, mother-led homesteads of people who are coming into Egypt. And as a result, there is family separation. And the authority that does family reunion is the UNHCR, but it has to work with the Egyptian authorities. But as of now, we haven't seen any evidence of that, but that is making it very difficult. I was in Cairo in May, and I saw a family where two boys and her mom have managed to come into the country, and their parents, that is their dad, was not allowed. I have seen a family that requires medical need where the mother and her cousin have come in, but the father and her grandfathers were not allowed in. The same in the city, the closest city between Egypt and Sudan, and it is the same problem.
Abdullahi, we haven't had much from the African Union on the Sudan crisis. We've tried to reach out to the African Union embassy here in America and also out there in Addis Ababa about this crisis. Now, what do you know? What is being recommended by humanitarian organizations like yours? Perhaps the African Union can help with the situation facing the Sudanese civilians.
That's very important again, because African Union has got a fundamental role. Let me separate the two roles very quickly. One is that the 1969 African Union on refugees is probably one of the most expansive piece of convention that we have that allows for people to be allowed to seek refuge in the neighboring countries. As a result, the African Union can lean on some of the countries, including Egypt, which is a signatory to the convention, to allow them over 120,000 Sudanese who are held up at the border to be allowed to go in because prima facie they are refugees. Number two, African Union also has got a fundamental role in terms of trying to find a political and diplomatic solution to this crisis. And African Union has not stepped up to the plate, while the conflict in Sudan, which started in Khartoum, is expanding to other places, including Darfur, which we know very well that violence, especially genocide, took place 20 years ago, and that has not been resolved. And now we are adding a new layer.
Well, Abdullahi, thank you very much for being on the ground and seeing what the situation is like and sharing that with us. Thank you. Abdullahi Halake is Refugees International Senior Advocate for East Horn and Southern Africa. In Botswana, hundreds of people flooded the streets in Gaborone on Saturday to demonstrate against homosexuality and deliver a petition to members of parliament opposing legislation seeking to make same-sex relations legal. Backed by various religious groups, the protesters marched across the city center to voice their opposition to a bill that aims to comply with a 2019 court ruling in favor of LGBTQ rights in the country.
I'm standing here in front of the National Assembly where a protest took place over the weekend. The march was organized by a group of evangelical churches to protest against a bill that is before Parliament. This bill seeks to legalize homosexuality. However, churches are saying parliamentarians are not supposed to vote for this bill. They are urging them to vote against the bill. There were members of the LGBTI community who tried to disrupt the march but were not successful.
It's quite important that members of the LGBTI community are protected, and it is very important that the laws in any country should have provisions that protect the members of the LGBTI community, because they are a part of the most vulnerable communities, and it's very important that they are assured of their protection, they are assured of their importance. They are part of democracy, they are part of any country, and they are part of a diverse and inclusive community.
We African, what we know is that a man is supposed to marry a lady, a woman, so that they can bear some children, they can build a family. Hanu, if you are talking about homosexuality, that thing you are talking about the same gender, which is wrong at all. Even when you are going to the church, they still preach about marriage. Different what? Different genders. Automatically, I disagree with homosexuality.
Now it is up to the members of parliament to decide if this bill passes or not. The bill is going to be discussed in the coming weeks. For VOA, this is Nkondisi Dube in Gaborone, Botswana.
General elections are scheduled in Zimbabwe on August 23rd to elect the president and members of both houses of parliament. The ruling ZANU-PF party and the leading opposition party Citizens Coalition for Change are doing everything possible to woo voters ahead of the vote. The election occurs amid a raging economic crisis. VOA's Paul Ndiho spoke to Elliot Masocha, a Zimbabwean political analyst and professor at DeVry University's Keller Graduate School of Management.
What I'm seeing is kind of like a peaceful campaign atmosphere, looking at people I have talked to, relatives that are supporting different political parties, something that we have never seen in Zimbabwe during past elections, that people can be, from the same village, supporting different political parties. Of course, there are some flare-ups of conflicts, removal of posters of some other political parties, minor intimidation and some beatings that have been reported in the media. But comparing to past elections, I can really say we are in Zimbabwe in the right direction.
What are some of the issues people want people are looking at during this campaign season?
ZANU-PF members are saying you should vote ZANU-PF because of what they have done, bringing independence to Zimbabwe in 1980 and developments they have made. schools that were not in the rural areas that are actually opportunity zones. That lifted a lot of people, including me, infrastructure, roads. So they are pointing at all those milestones and say, this is what we have brought to you over the years. And also the guarantee that President Mnangagwa is giving to Zimbabweans and the international community that we are going to have peaceful elections. And on the opposition part, they are mostly hitting on the economy. Okay, that is very much tough. On Zimbabweans, things are very much getting expensive, and they are going in the streets and talking to people who are unemployed, the youth, and say, this is what we want to end, because it's there. Poverty is there, unemployment is there. So they are looking into that and say, we are going to end this.
You talked about President Emmerson Mnangagwa and what he has been able to do, how he's urging the country to stay peaceful during this election period. But some of his critics have suggested that, one, he's aging. He's not a young man anymore. Number two, he's run a country where the economy has failed to stabilize. Things haven't gotten better for ordinary folks in Zimbabwe. You have high unemployment. People still line up to get money from banks. How would you square that?
The situation on the ground from a lot of people who are poor, it has never improved. And I don't think there's any government, any new government that is going to do miracles and end unemployment as much as we can like, but let's campaign in a peaceful way.
To echo your sentiments, I think peace is the key word there. Thank you so much for your insightful conversation.
Thank you very much.
Members of the Young African Leaders Initiative joined members of the African diaspora community over the weekend for a cleanup in Washington, D.C. to celebrate Nelson Mandela's month of focus on community service. The yearly members also reflected on their time in Washington and how they will transfer what they learned to their home countries. VOA's Anthony Labruto reports.
Young African leaders from across the continent gathered here at the Anacostia Public Library in Washington, D.C. to do one thing: give back to their communities. As Nelson Mandela Fellows, they're inspired by Mandela's legacy of community service in South Africa. Now they've translated that to the diaspora community here in Washington, D.C. For Jackie Reyes-Yanes, the director of the Washington, D.C. Mayor's Office on Community Affairs, the decision to include members of the diaspora and the local Anacostia community was one of continuing Mandela's actions of acceptance and integration in all of the city's communities.
This is what is DC all about. We are the hub, we are the bridge, where we connect everything. We are the nation's capital in Washington, D.C. So it's better to bring community, government, and community partners, and also other people from the diaspora to see that they're cherished. In Washington, D.C., Mayor Balso also always talks that it doesn't matter if you haven't been here 5 minutes or 5 generations. Once you're in Washington, D.C., you're a part of this fabric.
Sukaina Mohammed Saleh, a Nelson Mandela Fellow from Mauritania, says coming out to Anacostia means more than cleaning.
I think for me it's really the fight for something greater than himself, really. And that's something that I'm trying to live by every day. It doesn't need to always be about you. It can be about others, and I'm trying to do that every single day. Try to think, what is my purpose and how can I benefit someone beyond myself? Because I wanted to do something that will empower, I think, the Africans, that will give back to Africa, that will make Africa a better continent and, help out, young people as well there.
Entering their final weeks in Washington, the Yali Fellows will continue to do acts of service. Anthony Labruto, VOA News.
We're excited to hear what you think about Africa 54 and all our VOA Africa programs on our website at voaafrica.com. Still to come, scientists are linking global extreme weather to climate change. Stay with us.
Health, wellness, sport, beauty, medical breakthroughs. Healthy Living cares about your well-being. What are the main health concerns in Africa and around the world? Find out the latest on coronavirus. Connect with our experts and ask them questions.
How long does the virus stay?
Join me, Linor Moudou, in Washington, every week on Healthy Living, right here on VOA.
Welcome back to Africa 54. In other news, the Sudanese military says at least 9 people were killed, including 4 military personnel, when a civilian plane crashed late Sunday, shortly after taking off from Port Sudan. 1 child survived that crash that was blamed on a technical failure, according to the military. Gabonese election officials have announced that President Ali Bongo will face 18 other candidates in next month's election. Bongo is favored to win a 3rd term as the head of the West African state. His leading rivals include Alexandre Barrow Chambria of the opposition Rally for the Fatherland and Modernity Party, and the National Union's head, Paulette Misambo. And 8 police officers assigned to a security team protecting South Africa's deputy president have been arrested and are appearing in court on Monday after they were caught on video kicking and stomping on 2 men on a Johannesburg highway this month. One of the men was kicked unconscious in the attack. Record-breaking high temperatures are expected to continue this week in several parts of the world. As many scientists have linked the extreme weather to climate change, Pope Francis urged world leaders to fight it. VOA's Veronica Balderas Iglesias reports.
From Spain to Lebanon to the United States, the heat keeps breaking records this summer. The World Meteorological Organization attributes it to global warming.
Buongiorno.
On Sunday, Pope Francis shed light to the suffering climate change causes to many living beings around the planet and the urgency to fight it.
I renew my appeal to the leaders of the nations to do something more concrete to limit polluting emissions. It's an urgent challenge and cannot be put off. It concerns everyone. Let us protect our common home.
Unhoused populations and anyone who isn't used to long periods of scorching temperatures could be at risk, warned Palm Springs, California Mayor Grace Elena Garner, who was interviewed by ABC News.
When your body isn't used to these high temperatures, it can go into a shock. So if we don't act now, if we don't make sure that we're putting in the actions that we need to reduce the impacts of climate change, we are just going to see this get worse and worse.
Asked on ABC's This Week show whether climate change is a national security threat, Republican Representative Michael McCall replied,
"The climate is changing. And when you have arid, Africa, for instance, is becoming more and more arid, which, famine, breaks out of that. Terrorism breaks out of that, those conditions."
Last week, China and the United States, the 2 largest emitters of greenhouse gases, resumed talks on how to tackle the problem. But there were no breakthroughs. It will take a concerted effort to make a difference, said Washington State Governor Jay Inslee on ABC's This Week.
This is a solvable problem, but we need to stop using fossil fuels. That is the only solution to this massive assault on humanity.
Forecasters expect the heat waves to continue for several more days, if not weeks, in various parts of the world. Veronica Balderas Iglesias, VOA News, Washington.
Now to the FIFA Women's World Cup. Captain Alexandra Popp scored twice as 2-time champion Germany launched its bid for a 3rd Women's World Cup title with a 6-0 demolition of the Morocco debutants on Monday. For a recap of the 4 African teams in the opening matches, here's VOA Sports analyst Mukbil Yabaru.
The Women's World Cup 2023 has 4 African teams that have qualified, and all teams have played their very first games. Starting off with Nigeria, they had the best result of the 4 teams by drawing 0-0 to the Olympic champions Canada. The Nigerian side had 11 shot attempts to Canada's 16 attempts, showing that they were attacking and didn't back down. They were able to get 1 point from the draw, and they play Australia and Ireland next to potentially qualify for the knockout phase. Zambia had high expectations coming into this tournament, but were handed a very, very difficult loss, 5-0 at the hands of Japan. The most surprising thing was that they had 0 shot attempts. Hopefully they can brush off the loss and get prepared for Spain next, which will be another tough challenge. South Africa went up 1-0 in the 48th minute in their game against Sweden, but were unable to hold off the Swedes. And the Swedes came back and scored 2 goals to finish off the match 2-1 in their favor. Lastly, the Moroccan side played the Germans and lost in the biggest margin yet, 6-0. The Moroccan side never really got their footing in the game, and Germany was all over them from the very start until the end of the game. All the African sides have to remember that it was only 1 game and to continue to play the next 2 games to the best of their abilities. Anything can happen. This is FIFA's Women's World Cup. I am Mukbil Yabaro for VOA from Washington.
Thanks, Mukbil. And that's our show for today. Be sure to watch Africa 54 on our website at voaafrica.com. From all of us here in Washington, thanks for watching.
In 2022, the United Nations reported 27,180 instances of the 6 grave violations against children, including more than 8,600 children killed or maimed. In Sudan, there are reports of children who have been forced from their homes and in some cases separated from their families or subjected to sexual violence. Armed groups remain the main perpetrators of abuses against children in Colombia, where the forcible recruitment or use of children remains a prevalent concern, particularly for Afro-Colombian and indigenous communities in rural areas. In Afghanistan, the ban on girls' access to education beyond primary school, patterns of early and forced marriage, and the recruitment and use of child soldiers have been detrimental to the physical and emotional well-being of youth. Members of Russia's forces and its officials have committed crimes against humanity, including against children, and alongside other Russian officials have deported hundreds of thousands of Ukrainian civilians to Russia, including children. This stark reality serves as a poignant reminder of the urgency and necessity of strengthening the international community's child protection capacities. Children around the